All right, welcome into the Five Guys. Very original name that we've put up for this. Hopefully, we don't get sued by the end of the show. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick and at 5 Reasons Sports. We got Alex Donno. You can follow him very conveniently at Alex Donno. Of course, Alex is part of our extra yard coverage here on the 5 Reasons YouTube channel, among his 700 other commitments. But he and I have now committed to twice a week. We're going to try to do more of an old school radio show. Those still do exist, where we're going to get into all South Florida sports topics. We think we can cover all of them pretty well. We're probably going to try to do this every Tuesday and Thursday, and we'll bring on guests halfway through the show. Our guest today is going to be Alfredo Arteaga from 3 yards per carry. Most likely on Thursday, we'll pivot a little bit more to the Heat, but the Dolphins are in the news today. Let's get to the sponsors, and then Alex and I will say our piece at the very beginning of this. First sponsor, our friends over at Water Cleanup of Florida. You can find them at WCUFL.com. That's WCUFL.com, your one-stop water and mold cleanup shop based in Boca Raton. They service the entire area. You've heard about them on 5 on the floor and 3 yards per carry for quite a while. They do a great job. The best thing I can say about Michael and Robert and their team, other than that they're big Miami sports fans, they got the Udonis Haslam stuff all over the warehouse, is that they're honest people. We've sent them to people, and when they don't think the job is for them, they'll tell you. They're not going to do the job, charge you extra, all that kind of stuff. No, that's not what they do at Water Cleanup of Florida. So check them out in Boca Raton. Again, try to get in there beforehand. Do the preventative stuff before the leaks happen or right as the leaks are happening. Don't try to do it after as much, because we know the insurance companies don't always take care of you. But if you need to, they can take care of you in that sense too. So check them out. WCU, that's WCUFL.com, Water Cleanup of Florida. Make sure you mention 5 Reasons. If you've got the schmutz, they got the guts. I need Greg here to do that. I'm going to set Alex up to do that. We'll get to our other sponsor a little bit later in the show. All right, I'm going to throw this at you, Alex, before we start. We've got a topic for the day, and you and I did the research on this a little bit beforehand. Wikipedia is a useful tool. The teams down here have not had a lot of good general managers since Pat Riley took over with the Miami Heat. We were trying to say, okay, who's the best, who's the worst? We know who the best is. We'll touch on that obviously a little bit more. But one of the reasons we got kind of turn onto this topic is because there's another general manager in town who's been doing good work lately, and we're not used to that. So I'll just go to you on this. Top of your head, worst general manager we've had in this town since the mid 90s. You're a little younger than me, but you're not that young. So since the mid 90s.
I mean, I got to say Jeff Ireland is up there for me, because Ethan, part of the way that I measure this are expectations versus reality. So I'm not going to put somebody like Dennis Hickey. I can't remember what Dennis Hickey did, if anything, but I also didn't have any expectations for Dennis Hickey when the Dolphins made him their general manager. Whereas Jeff Ireland was the guy handpicked by Bill Parcells, who was also a major bust. He just came down here to get a little sun, is basically what Parcells did. And, he
play the ponies and drove the golf cart around. That was basically it.
Yeah. So, so Parcells came down here and basically brought in rejects from the Cowboys organization to run the Dolphins, basically run the Dolphins to the ground. And then, of course, Ireland, the bedside manner was awful. He had the well-publicized incident with Des Bryant, where he, strongly implied that she was a professional. His mother was a professional, if you know what I mean. So that one's got to be up there for me. And you can definitely find a who's who of failed Miami Dolphins GMs, Ethan, when you look through that. I mean, I'm looking through, and we're only doing it since the Pat Riley era. Well, really, even before that, it was, Don Shula was the GM, and Dave Wanstedt and Jimmy were their own GMs, despite being the head coaches. I mean, Rick Spielman, Randy Mueller, Hickey, who I mentioned. And honestly, Ethan, the more, I've been pretty critical in some ways of Chris Grier. But when I look through the list of other Miami Dolphins GMs for, the past 30 years, I think history is going to look pretty favorable on Grier. I mean, he's obviously not done yet, so his tenure is still being written, but I can't find another GM on that list since Dave Wanstedt was the GM/coach. Another GM on the Dolphins list that actually got a team got a roster that went to the playoffs 2 straight times. That hasn't happened since Grier. So I think right now history is looking more favorable upon him than I initially thought.
Well, Grier just stuck around. He's outlasted all of them. I mean, Grier was there, and we're going to talk to Alfredo about this Grier is there. Our friend Louis Sung is weighing in here. Don't dismiss baseball. We are going to get to them. Trust me. Grier was there when most of these GMs were there. What's interesting about these other GMs in the Dolphins case is that a lot of them had success after they left.
Right. Spielman, big one.
Did a pretty decent job as a scout with New Orleans. They had a couple of very strong drafts. And Spielman was in Minnesota for a long time and had some success, got them the playoffs. They had assistant GMs here who actually went on to other things, like George Payton, who's actually still in Denver and is responsible for that horrific Russell Wilson contract. But they've had guys who've done better elsewhere. I mean, we haven't mentioned Tannenbaum at this point. Like, he kind of had multiple roles with the Dolphins. Now he's just spewing BS on ESPN. I'm with you on the expectation level thing, and that's interesting when you go to the other ones. I would argue that until the guy for the Panthers came around, Bill Zito, and we're going to talk about him, I would argue that since Pat came in, and I'm putting Pat and Andy together, technically when Riley came in, Randy Fund was his GM, and then Randy played a role in them drafting Michael Beasley, and then Randy was no longer the GM, and then over time, actually hasn't really worked in the NBA since, and then over time, Ellisberg got the GM title, and he's the one who's negotiating with most other teams. So I consider Pat and Andy together. But I would argue that Dave Dombrowski was probably the best general manager in terms of knowing how to do his job, other than Pat and Andy since 1995, 96. And you mentioned that Jimmy was his own GM. Dave brought in Spielman, and that was the whole thing. Dave was above Spielman to start, and then they thought they could trick us by just changing the chairs there. And I always
the funniest thing about that was, because I listened. This was before I was in sports talk radio, but I listened religiously. And so the Dolphins did this weird thing where for a couple days we really thought they were going to make Dan Marino the GM. They ended up giving him that symbolic position. So for a couple days we thought, they're going to make Dan Marino the GM, and then they gave him some no-show job, basically. He's got a bigger role in the organization now than he did back then. It
wasn't intended to be, though, Alex. I'll tell you, because I was at that press conference. Yeah, so we show up at the press conference. Well, First, there was the year before where Jimmy didn't want to coach anymore, right? So basically, Dave was the assistant head coach. So Huizenga flew out to Naples and picked up Dave and brought him in and basically said, "You're gonna ascend here." So that was the first thing. But then after they switched the titles, we had a press conference, and honestly, I don't think they told Spielman and Marino what their responsibilities were, because I was pretty close with Rick at that time, and Rick didn't have a suit, he didn't know what he was supposed to do. And then Dan. We were talking to Dan, and he's like, "I gotta fucking get home to Claire." I don't think that he even knew what he was supposed to be doing. And the best Marino story through all of that was we were at the Senior Bowl. I used to actually attend that quite a bit, and so Senior Bowl is an awful experience if you're not into the minutia of the guys that they're looking at. If you are, it's the greatest thing ever, Big O. But for me, I was whatever. Yeah. So we're sitting there, and it was raining, and there's there's these metal benches, okay, and everybody's circling around, and Dan is just sitting on the metal benches with his hand like this, watching offensive linemen work. And the story, and I think that's what he decided, basically, no, I'm not doing this. But then the best part was, Spielman told me this story after, that when they got done, Dan's like, "Okay, when's the car coming to pick us all up and take us to the airport?" He wanted a car service, limo service, whatever. And Rick's like, "We're on a football operations budget." He's like, "We're just putting a cab." You know what I mean? Wow. So I feel like Dan got the message. So Dan would not be one of the best general managers in Miami Dolphins or South Florida sports history. But the reason we're pivoting on this, one of the reasons is Grier, and we'll talk to Alfredo about that too, because Alfredo follows the Heat pretty religiously as well. Is that Bill Zito has kind of changed the narrative on this. I don't feel like he came in with even the expectations of some of the other Panthers guys. I'll go through this list quickly. Since Riley came in, Brian Murray was already the GM here. He kind of kept switching between GM and coach. Okay, that was the late 90s. Bill Torrey was an interim GM, but he was really the president of the organization. Chuck Fletcher was interim. They hired Rick Dudley with a lot of fanfare. They hired Mike Keenan with even more fanfare. They hired Jacques Martin. Then there was a power struggle, and he was the coach and GM. That didn't work. Randy Sexton was here for a year. And you talked about we were talking about Dale Talon. where they brought him in to replicate the success of the Blackhawks. He kind of did. They had 2 division titles, 2 playoff appearances, which is after no playoff appearances in 20 years was significant. But then they hired Tom Rowe to do analytics.
And then became the coach.
And then he became the coach, and then talent took over again. They had 1 more playoff appearance. But I mean, if you look at Zito's record, he took over September of 2020, 3 playoff appearances. They'll have a 4th this year. 1 conference title, 1 division title, 1 President's Trophy. They're in the running for that again, and 1 Stanley Cup appearance. Like that record is up there with pretty much anyone down here other than Riley.
Yeah, he's doing an incredible job, Zito. And again, like the fanfare or lack thereof that he came in with, it completely paled in comparison to Dale Talon. Like you and I remember well when Dale was first brought in to run the Panthers. They created that fancy blueprint hashtag, and he was gonna turn Panthers into the Blackhawks South. And it goes back to what I said earlier. Like he's up there, and I know made the playoffs a couple times, division titles, but when I do my criteria of expectations versus reality, he's up there with one of my bigger failures, Talon. And that's despite the fact the Panthers did get into the postseason. But it's just, as the years went on, to me, it was more and more apparent that he was too much of a dinosaur. Like, I think you have to have this perfect marriage where you can't be purely analytics, but you also can't be purely eye test. And Talon admitted he was purely an eye test guy. He threw stats at him. He did not care. He did not want to see stats. He didn't want to see, ice possession, shots. He didn't care. It was strictly eye test with him. But the guy became a dinosaur very, very, very quickly down here. And I think there was some stubbornness that came into play, and some of that came to light after the fact. So it's amazing how Zito has been a breath of fresh air. And obviously the sample size is so much smaller than Riley. I get it. It's only been a few years with Zito, but he can kind of become, and it took Riley, a long time here, a little more than a decade before the Heat won a championship. Hopefully it doesn't take the Panthers that long, but you could clearly see early on that Riley actually had a plan and he could build a consistent winning team. And we're seeing the early signs of that with Bill Zito. And as a South Florida sports fan, having that sort of competence from a general manager, as we've discussed, very rare.
Rare. And beyond that, he kind of saved hockey in this town. I mean, that's the bigger thing. Like we talked about, I always said the thing about Pat, whether you disagree with some decisions or not, he made basketball matter here. There's and that is what should go on the statue. Honestly, he made it matter. Like before he came in, they were not a perennial playoff team. And, obviously they have been, and then, 7 finals appearances and 3 championships, and all the players. I mean, you talk about, the best players in the world have played here. That's, whether Shaq or Dwayne or LeBron and now Jimmy, and he's put these teams together and they've pivoted. They've gone to different types of organizations, more of a developmental organization now. It's more of a group effort when they make decisions. But the other thing when we talk about it is a results business. So, there's no question to me, Zito is now 2. Dombrowski did win a World Series. Of course, the problem was he wasn't given a chance to build on it. So we'll never know. Beinfest won a World Series too. I hate to say it, that always felt a little fluky to me, but he did make some moves. He did make some moves to get them over the top. They did before, Urbina, macheted someone. He was a useful reliever for them when they made that trade. And then honestly, he did acquire a lot of prospects when they broke the thing down afterwards. Not all of them panned out, but he did. A few of them did. And there was, of course, the ownership issue there over him, which is hard to tell. And sometimes that plays into these decisions. I think that the thing that, to me, to be a good GM now in terms of process, just results, is you have to be open to analytics, but not relying upon them. But it can't be one thing, like you mentioned with Talon. And I also think what we have to do sometimes is get past, like, he gives good press conference. Like, I feel like some of the guys on that list, the expectations went up. Because, like, Mike Keenan had won our cup with the Rangers. Dudley fed all the local beat guys, so they kind of liked him. Ireland was not likable, and I feel like we kind of held that against him a little bit. And Spielman, the thing about Rick was, like, when what kept happening with the Dolphins was they kept bringing in one guy but not replacing the other, and so, like, there was all this backstabbing going on.
And that continued through, and that happened through multiple ownerships, right? It happened in the late Huizenga years, and then it happened in the early Stephen Ross years, where you remember Don Aponte, Joe Philbin, Jeff Fire. It's like 1 week, one of them had final say, the next week.
And so nobody never knew who was responsible. And then Saban was forced to keep Spielman, and then Saban brought in Mueller, and then Cameron kept Mueller. So again, it was one or the other, or maybe I think it was Mueller actually was given the right to hire Cameron. But the whole deal is, and one of the reasons we're going to bring in Alfredo now, right after we bring in our sponsor, is that there's one guy who's been with the Dolphins forever. And I feel like Dolphin fans, and there's definitely some turning against him more over the past couple days. I know Alfredo has a different perspective on this. Dolphin fans really don't know what to blame him or credit him for, because he's been there so long, but not always in charge. And that does get into the final say thing. Yeah. So we're going to bring Alfredo in a minute. We'll get into this further. Do want to mention a great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, Better Edge. You can find them at betteredge.com. If you're looking at a place to gamble legally in the state of Florida, but also find the line you want, betteredge.com. Use the code 5RSN or 5 Reasons. Get $20 to play. They got all the lines up there, but they're really markets. So you can check out the markets, see what will work for you. Also, and you can make an order and see if it gets filled, or try to fill an order that's already there. Also, we have tournaments there. We're going to be restarting those soon, and you can find player props. So check it out. It's betteredge.com, betteredge.com. Use the code 5RSN. Get $20 to play and find the line that you want. All right, we're going to bring on now Alfredo Arteaga from 3 yards per carry. And for a long time, look, it's just sipping. Look at that. Look at that. See, I just had some pictures and like a Smurf and Cartman behind me. What this is like a decorated office here.
Yeah, I built a studio.
Beautiful. Right? Yeah, it looks great.
Yeah, once you have as good a podcast and as popular a podcast as we do, you got to spend some money and put some money into it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I had to green screen myself into a mansion is how I do it. I bypass building a studio. I just green screened right into one.
Yeah, I told someone's house for a little bit. That's it. I'm kidding. But
yeah, I told Ethan I could do this for you for a small fee, and so you should be looking forward to that beautiful palatial studio that Ethan's going to have very shortly.
Well, I'm still not removing the Smurfs. I will say again, follow 3 yards per carry. Of course, you guys should start doing live. Why don't you guys do lives before we bring this on? Like you guys, why are Simon afraid to go live? What's that about?
I have no idea. He makes documentaries now and wins awards, so he's fine with it.
He might be past it. All right, we're going to get to this. Let me ask you this question, okay? Well, let me pose this before we get into Grier more specifically, which is kind of why we brought you on. You would agree with us that Riley Ellisberg is the best GM pairing we've had, executive group, personnel acquisition, group that we've had in South Florida over the past 30 years. Is that fair to say?
Easily. If we're going to go historically, I think Dave Dombrowski has proven some things over time. But it's Riley and Ellisberg, that whole group.
Okay. So since Pat came in 95, let's just do that. Who is the best general manager the Dolphins have had?
Chris Grier.
Okay.
I agree.
They've had some bad ones. They've had some terrible ones. Okay.
Who's the worst? Who's the worst?
Jeff Ireland was absolutely the worst, and it's not particularly close.
And do you say that just because he was sort of ornery and thought he was the smartest guy in the room, or are you saying that because of the way he went about the actual job?
He took some of the prototypes that he learned from Bill Parcells and tried to apply them blindly here in Miami, and it ended up becoming some of the worst moves that this franchise has ever made.
What was it? Smart, tough, physical, disciplined, or something like that? I mean, it was a size prototype, right?
Yeah, from drafting Chad Henne in the second round and thinking that that's the quarterback of the future, to trading for Dion Jordan and thinking that that's DeMarcus Ware. It's rare that you could look back at a general manager's tenure and he makes absolutely every bad move possible in succession, but he actually did.
Well, I'm going to go to Alex here in a second, but why did Spielman and Ireland have more success? In particular, those are two that come to mind after they left Miami, or after they left. Where was Davey at the time?
Maybe there was a dysfunctional culture here, and maybe that's a possibility. I do know that Jeff Ireland has learned from his mistakes here, and he was brought on by with Mickey Loomis, and New Orleans had a pretty good culture in their front office when he arrived, and he's had success there. Spielman's now being really successful on TV. I think he's great on TV. I think he's better than another particular general manager on TV, but
the other guy you speak of is terrible.
He's awful. He's awful. Like, how did Tagovailoa ever get that job, Alf? I don't understand. He was a cap guy for Parcells.
Yeah, well, he had really good connections with CAA, and,
yeah, that's it.
And if you know every agent, you could sell pretty much to anybody that you're really connected, and you could get players. And then, of course, your first delivery is Ndamukong Suh, so he sold the owner with that. And there you had it. You had 4 years of Mike Tannenbaum.
So I want to ask you, Alf, and this goes back to Chris Grier. So we're taking it full circle. These 2 days so far of the legal tampering period. Now, obviously, you cover the Dolphins, the closest of the three of us in the room, but Ethan and I both follow it pretty closely. Really, and I know yesterday was gloom and doom for Dolphins Twitter. Nothing really surprised me.
Did you see what Hal Habib wrote? It was the worst thing since 9/11.
Yeah. Oh my God. No, I didn't see that quote. Jeez. but anyway,
I made that up. But if you read it, he called it. He called it one of the darkest days in Dolphin history.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, it really doesn't shock me with first of all, seeing what Christian Wilkins got with the Raiders. Like, doesn't shock me the Dolphins didn't match that. And like, none of the departures really shocked me, just understanding the cap situation. So it's like, I'm not really mad at Grier for yesterday. If anything, I'm mad at the entire organization for not doing more last season, right? For not getting a home playoff game, for all the regrets we had from last season, which has led us to this point. But has anything from these first 2 days surprised you? And what's your overall temperature, Alf, on obviously the big name players the Dolphins lost, but some of the important players they have agreed to deals with to replace those guys?
Well, two things that surprised me. Nothing on Wilkins surprised me. I thought he was good. And I said so on the podcast. I said he would be the third highest paid defensive tackle in football. Robert Hunt, $100 million, $64 million guaranteed. Now, I'm a Robert Hunt truther, and I think I won every single argument on Twitter for the last 2 years when I kept telling people he's really good because the Panthers gave him $100 million, so he must be good. But I was surprised by the coldness that they dealt with AVG. It's $10 million a year, and they essentially decided to take, and maybe it's a slight upgrade, but it's an older player in Shaq Barrett. And maybe they decided to have a small savings of $2 million with Shaq Barrett. But they essentially told AVG, you can go, it's okay. We're not really going to compete with, for your services. I was surprised by that because I thought that would be one of the guys that they would want to keep.
And the other guy was Brandon Jones, who did come back from injury last year, but had a pretty.
That's a shocking deal because
right. He's a pretty limited skill set, right? Like, I mean, he's a really good blitzer. He's a good locker room guy, and he did get better as the year went on. But I don't know that I'd make a big commitment. I think why it hit people yesterday is that I think these four players in particular, if you include Brandon Jones as the fourth, they're all sort of likable personalities who interacted with people on social media. And so I think it's more a lot of sentimentality came in yesterday. And I just have this question because I agree with Alex. Like, to me, the problem is not the cap. I think Brandon Shore does as good a job with the cap as you can. I think he's pretty equivalent to Andy Ellisberg with a lot of the things that he's managed lately. And we know, and you've made this point too, that it's not really just about Tua. I mean, that assigning Tua an extension saves them money in the long run, and we'll see what the numbers come in on this. I guess my questions would be this. One is, should they have tried harder to retain or extend Wilkins and Hunt in particular? Because I agree. I maybe AVG just wanted to play close to home, which that might have played into it too if the money was relatively close. I don't know what they offered. But as far as Hunt and Wilkins go, should they have offered more or gotten those deals done before the end of the season? That would be, or before the time ran out on it. That would be the one question. And the second question is, the part I agree with Alex about is this thing basically fell apart with 4 minutes left against Tennessee. Like, if they win that game, everything looks different. And you look at it, it was after that Chubb got hurt. It was after that some of the other guys got hurt. Do you think they would have maybe retained more of the roster if they won a playoff game?
I think so. I think they probably would have made a stronger bid for Hunt, or maybe even franchised Wilkins. But as far as getting them signed ahead of time, maybe Robert Hunt, you could have sat down with him last year and paid him at market for last year, and fans would have lost their minds because they would have been paying a guard $15 million a year.
Yeah.
But it turns out that would have been a bargain. But I think Christian Wilkins, that thing was gone. I think Christian Wilkins, correctly so, he identified Quinnen Williams as a contemporary. And more importantly, his former teammate at Clemson, Dexter Lawrence, who got a big deal, and said, I want more money than those two guys. And those two guys were the fourth and the fifth highest paid defensive tackles in football. That means that he would have been asking for around $25 million last year. Well, he got 27.5 APY this year. So it was wrong on the market. I think Chris Grier was probably sticking to his guns and probably offering something close to what Dexter Lawrence got. And Christian Wilkins is right. He's going to Las Vegas. That's a no state tax state. So it's dollar for dollar, the same. The team is not as good, but the money's better. So, yeah, Wilkins was right. He was right to bet on himself. Chris Grier was wrong on how he judged the market, but I won't blame him because I don't want to pay a defensive tackle $27.5 million, especially when I got a great deal with Zach Sealer at $10 million a year.
So I do have to ask, what happens next with Tua and when? What do you think the timetable is, Alf, on getting an extension done with Tagovailoa? And, hear people tossing around north of 50 million. Do you have a number in mind per season, and maybe the guaranteed? Because that's the real indicator, right? Not the yearly salary.
Yeah, that's about right. About the 50 million APY, although I think it'll be closer to 55 if they go right to market. As far as the time frame, and the guarantee is going to be important. Like if they stick to somewhere around 150, 160, then you're talking about like an outlay of about 3 to 4 years and an out maybe in year 4. So that's probably good business. As far as when it gets done, Herbert got his deal in July and Burrow got his in September. Jalen Hurts got his right before the draft. So I'm going to go smack dab in the middle. I say right before camp. So he's in Herbert's boat. I think he gets his in July.
So this comment comes in before we close here from Jason Stavros. Everyone crying over guys we lost who never won bleep. Couldn't win in the cold. December, let him go. I think we meant let him go. Still have a great offense and a defensive coordinator I trust. Let's get to the macro of all of this. Okay, since both of you think Grier is the best general manager they've had, but again, since Shula.
Grading on the curve.
Jimmy,
yeah.
Grading on the curve. I guess since Jimmy fell off, because Jimmy's first couple of years I thought were great, and I'll always point to 1999 where he should have pivoted to moving up in the draft and supplementing the core after he accumulated all those picks the first 2 years, and obviously hit on guys like Jason and Pat and Sam and Zach. But if we're going to make that argument that Grier is better than I think a lot of fans think he is, how much time does he get to win a playoff game, Alf? Because ultimately this is a results business, and we can talk about process as long as we want. And these guys didn't win anything and all the rest of this. He's got to win something, right? Like, or is it going to be Grier is going to be firing his head coach again? Like, I don't feel like that's the direction that this should go.
Well, here's the thing. He's cleared the slate to have a lot of assets in 2025. Steven Ross is going to have to make a decision by then. Who knows? Maybe his daughter is the one that makes the decision. But in 2025, they're going to have about $72 million in cap space. And that's even considering a Tua extension. And they're going to have 11 draft picks if you count these 2 compensatory picks that they're going to get. So, is the team going to be diminished in 2025? Maybe not, because maybe they hit on a couple of draft picks and they're going to retain Waddle, Phillips, and Holland. But the owner is going to say, look, I saw what happened in 2024, and let's say, you got the same results, you made the playoffs, and you're one and done. He's going to say, now I got all these assets. Am I going to hand them to you again? Or am I going to get somebody else in here to use the $70 million in cap space and the 11 draft picks? because next year is going to be, we're talking about bare bones for this offseason. The team that gets built here and the draft and in June 1st cuts, that's the team. For 2025, it's going to be limited, but you have that cash base. Who knows how much of they're going to use it? They're going to use of it going forward. So the owner has a decision to make in 2025. Do I hand all these assets back to Chris Grier to keep building the team, or do I hand it to somebody else? So I'm thinking that the team is going to have to do something this year, and I don't think it's just merely winning a playoff game. I think they want the little shiny thing like a division championship. I think Stephen Ross saw the pathway there this past year, and Mike McDaniel, say what you want. Maybe you don't like his coaching or whatever, but the guy came in with a promise. I always look at coaches by what they promise. He came in promising good offense, and the 2 years he's here, the number 6 offense and the number 1 offense.
Right.
So now
after they didn't crack the top 10 for 30 years. So yes, and now it is about getting the defense.
So I think here's the baseline: win the division and win a playoff game, and Chris Grier gets to use the toys for 2025.
Makes sense.
Well, the division should be easier to get because I don't think the Patriots or Jets are ready to win in any case at this point, and the Bills have cut more players than the Dolphins have, or lost more players than the Dolphins have. So, this is going to end up coming down to a Josh Allen Tua conversation again at the end of next year, like it always does. It's pretty much where we're headed. Alf, we appreciate you joining us. You can find him at 3 yards per carry at Alf_Arteaga. Thanks to Alex. Thanks to our sponsors, Better Edge and Water Cleanup. Alex and I will be back Thursday. We'll talk Heat. Then they got their game against Denver on Wednesday night. No hero, no love. You'll hear about that on 5 on the Floor. Have a good one, everybody.